This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
The North Dakota oil and natural gas industry works here, and works here, and here, and even works here by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, flood protection projects, and our schools. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities.
Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org.
Hi, I'm Megan Invick with Americans for Prosperity, North Dakota. Rising property taxes are putting pressure on homeowners across our state. While recent relief is a good start, families need permanent solutions, not temporary fixes. That's why AFP North Dakota is pushing for meaningful, permanent property tax reform, so homeowners can plan for the future without worrying about being taxed out of their own backyards. Learn more about the road to opportunity and our plan for property tax relief at afpnd.org.
Everyone, welcome to Plain Talk. Before we get started, we have Chris from the forum for some North Dakota trivia. Chris, what do you got for us?
How many people born in North Dakota have gone to space?
You know what? Learning the lessons from the last question, I'm going to say 1.
Fair enough. Chad says 1. What do you
Chris
say,
has asked
Rob?
this before. How many North Dakotans were on the Supreme Court? Well, he asked this before, and the answer was 0. I'm going to go with 0. 0 North Dakotans.
0
in
North
space.
Dakotans have been to space. If we were doing a Price is Right, the closest answer without going over it, I have to give it to Chad. The correct answer is 3.
What?
3 people born in North Dakota have been to space.
No idea. Good learning we're doing here.
We learn something new every day.
You learn something new every day. That's the point of a show like that. You guys have Plain Talk every day, learning, curiosity, new things. If that's you, dear listener or viewer, consider a subscription to the forum. Visit inforum.com/subscribe for our introductory rate, just $2 for 6 months. Over to you guys.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. You know, last week I wrote about a situation in Oliver County that I think is both interesting in its own right because it touches on something that's on the minds of a lot of North Dakotans right now, is data centers, and you know how much power they use building them. The people that are going to live near where they want to build these projects, they obviously have some concerns. What's it going to do to our power rates? It's a lot of good questions. It's a very interesting debate. On the other hand, I personally think they pretend maybe a lot of good things for our state in terms of economic activity and commerce and stuff. So it's a really interesting debate. It's an important debate that we're having right now. But on top of that, something happened in Oliver County that I think is happening in a lot of places, which is where that debate went off the rails to the point where it made somebody who was in the room want to quit. And in some ways, I almost think that's a tactic. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Dave Berger, who is a now former county commissioner in Oliver County, but has a decades-long track record of public service in that region. But first, I should introduce my guest co-host, Zach Gista, who's going to be on because Chad is taking some time off, and so he's actually going to be missing several shows coming up. And I've had people messaging me saying, "Where's Chad? Did Chad quit the show?" It's nothing like that. Chad's just taking some time off, and we're going to be doing the show. Zach's sitting in for today's episodes. He'll be on this show, which will be publishing on Wednesday, and then also the Friday show. Zach, thanks for doing this, first of all.
Hey, it's good to be with you. I think the least surprising fact in North Dakota is that Chad Oban's on vacation again, so we'll get by without him.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Lots of vacations that guy takes. I don't know. Obviously, I should also know the fact that this is Representative Zach Ista, although not running for re-election this cycle. So, but I suppose we should acknowledge that for people who don't know that Zach's also a member of the legislature. Now, let's go to our guest, Dave Berger. Dave, welcome. For 50 years, you have been a fixture of public service in Oliver County. And that's not just because you told me all the things that you've done in the past, but since I wrote about you last week, I've been getting text messages and phone calls and emails about how if you want to get things done in Oliver County, Dave Berger's the guy you want on your team. He served his neighbors in Center and the surrounding community through decades of growth and change. But last week, that tenure came to an abrupt end. During a Tuesday commission meeting, Dave did something he probably didn't imagine he'd be doing. He walked away, not because he lacked the will to work, but because, in his words, humanity and civil discourse have been replaced by malice. Dave, I wanted to have you on to talk a little bit about that because, again, this is something I've written about a lot. I have this concept of infrastructure that includes humans. I think sometimes you live in a community and you wonder who's mowing the lawn, who's making sure the grass gets mowed at the park, who's raising the money for the scoreboard, who's sitting in those meetings about making sure that the water that comes out of our taps is clean and safe. There's a lot of people who do that work. They don't get a lot of attention. Frankly, they don't get a lot of pay. They don't get a lot of congratulations, but they are making things work. You were one of those people. Now you're not. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'll go back to 1976. I was 19 years old. My Aunt Betty Hagel, who the Civic Center is named after, just kept pushing me to get involved. So I started running the parade, started doing more stuff in the community, and pretty soon I was running the community club, then gaming, and been very involved in the fair board. 9 of us started a fitness center. It doesn't stop. If somebody calls with an idea, I love it. I love to get involved with them and go with it. So on my end, it isn't me alone. It's the people in the community that reach out and say, hey, it'd be cool to have music on Main Street. It'd be cool to have a rib fest during our Old Settlers celebration. So that's how I got going. And I guess I just haven't stopped.
Well, Dave, good to meet you, first of all. Really appreciate your years of service to your community. Rob and I had chatted before the show. There's dozens upon dozens of folks like you all throughout North Dakota, especially in our rural towns. You certainly have dedicated yourself to your community, to public service. You don't strike me as much of a shrinking violet, not somebody that backs down easily. Give us a flavor of how contentious this debate got for you, for others in your position, that you said enough's enough.
Well, I think it started with the author of that web page, the Hanover Data Center or whatever, Oliver County. They had reached out. What can we do? I said, well, start a Facebook page. I said, but keep it facts. Anybody that posts something that isn't accurate, don't allow it. So I actually one that got her going because if you want answers, how do you reach out? How do you get started? So that started out very good. On my end, when we were contacted by Applied Digital, it was like, okay, we got to start finding out what this is about because a lot of us didn't know anything about data centers. Right? We had to learn. And that's where I started reaching out to other states' attorneys, other county commissioners. And I've got to meet a lot of them in the last probably 4 years, going to Morton County Commission, Mercer County, gotten to know many of them. But that's how you start. You reach out, you try to get the facts. Well, pretty soon, they were talking about the electricity. Okay, the grid can't handle it. I was at a meeting at Jamestown at the North Dakota Farmers Union. They had a panel, committed talk, and it was Josh Craver with the NDRECs. And he talked about how the grid can't handle it. Okay. So they got to bring in their own power. Then it was water. Well, we don't have a big aquifer in Oliver County. So they can't suck out of the aquifer. They don't want dirty water. They want purified water. And you can buy that at the power plants because the power plants make their own purified water. And then, of course, it was the noise. And so I got to thinking, I worked at Mid Dakota Power for 40 years. So I worked shift work, took care of my dad who lived on the ranch, and I ranched. And it's just something you do. But my work there, shift work, and the noise of the power plant, the data center cannot be any louder because you get behind the plant, the fans, they're loud. You have to have ear protection or you can't stand it back there. Um, then, of course, the lights. So I started thinking about it. Well, drive by a power plant, any big facility in North Dakota, they're 17 stories tall and the lights are shining down. So if you're worried about lights, a power plant and a coal mine, they have more lights than anybody. And they don't shine them out the view. They want it for their security area. And then I got to thinking the other day when somebody went after me about the lights. I like everybody that lives in town. I think you got street lights. And I don't think I've heard anybody say shut the street lights off. So that's the facts I tried to get answered.
Now, Applied Digital came in and they're wanting to build and I mean it made statewide headlines that Oliver County and Mercer County had implemented moratoriums on data centers. I think Oliver's was 6 months long. Um, and I think the intent there was to give yourselves some room to consider and deliberate on this. But I mean ultimately, I think something like this is really hard. And again, I understand that I think there's people of good faith on both sides of the data center issue. I personally generally am supportive of them, but I can understand people having arguments on the other side that make sense. I'm not, so I don't want to debate data centers. What really concerned me when you resigned is the idea that somebody who is showing up, somebody who is trying to guide a factual debate, somebody who is trying to make good informed decisions about something like this was driven out by the process. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, like I say, it started with that page, Facebook page, and then the negative started coming out. And it's like, okay, I'm trying to answer them. And it just got like the slander, the uh, judgment of my character, my integrity. They just started calling it into question like I never existed before. And a lot of people that are following that page, I've never met. They live in the county. I've lived here my whole life, been involved my whole life, and I never knew some of these people. And now they're attacking me without knowing my past. So I tried to address that. Why are you doing it? Then the calls with swearing at me, the F word, the A word, and like, okay, if you want to have a conversation, I'll just lay on the counter, cuss at the counter. And then when you get done, we'll have a decent conversation. But it just kept escalating. They didn't want to hear.
People would like call you and curse you out on the phone.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And they didn't want to hear the facts. And, I've heard, gosh, in the last month, probably 50 people have told me, Dave, I have been researching this way more than you probably ever did. Well, you can research anything you want and you can get the answer you want. It might not be accurate. And that was my point. I was trying to get the accuracy and give it back to them. But all of a sudden I was on the hit list and we had a lady from Edgeley come up to our county commission meeting in February, yelling from the back of the room. Well, then the guy did, and I'm assuming her husband. And finally I said, well, come up to the microphone and speak. Why are you yelling from the back of the room? He posted it on the Facebook page that I yelled at him. Well, when you've got a microphone in front of you, it's easy sometimes to get too close or too far away. And I just said, why don't you come up to the front of the room and talk into the microphone? Let the public hear what you have to say. And he did, but they're just accusing me. And then I bought in. I have never told anyone but my wife that knows how I feel about it because I'm not sure how I feel. And Dave with Applied Digital, when he first called, and I probably had, 7, 8 phone conversations with him in 3 weeks. And I just told him, I'm not sold on it. What you got to sell it to is the public. And that's how I got to base my opinions, right? You've got to listen to both sides. And that's what I was trying to do because right now I've got a list. I've had 3 people call and ask for that list. I've got 80 people that want to hear more or see what it can do for our community. But the negatives don't want to hear that.
You know, Dave, I think what there's an undercurrent in a lot of this opposition that just can't reconcile the possibility that you're doing what you tell us you're doing, weighing the pros and cons, gathering evidence, listening to stakeholders, listening to your community, and trying to make the best decision you can with the information you have. And I think a lot of people just think, well, if you side with the data centers, you're in the pocket of some big corporation. Let me just ask you directly. I mean, do you stand to gain in any personal way if this project advances, or on the other side if it doesn't advance?
No, they've done an open records on 13 of us, but I've been the most vocal, so I know it's aimed more at me, and I got nothing to hide. Like I said, I'll release all my stuff, but they're going to pay for it because according to Century Code, they have to pay me, and I got nothing to hide. But when you talk about people reaching out, state legislators, other county commissioners, I've had a judge reach out, other states' attorneys. It's been amazing what they're looking at, after they heard I resigned, even before some are reaching out. Well, Dave, like a couple state legislators in our district, District 33, here's what you got to take care of if you allow them in. You got to make sure this money continues for a few years, not for 7 years or 10. This money that they're promising, we got to get it in writing that the community can afford to, keep this going. And so I've had so many positive comments. It's unbelievable.
Well, and you
And
mentioned, Dave, just to follow up quickly, that the state's attorney's been involved with this. And I think we all have to appreciate our rural state's attorneys in the state. They really carry a heavy burden in a part-time role and are asked to do a lot of things that might be far outside their natural area of expertise. But, Rob's reporting touched on this, that one of the issues wasn't data centers good, data centers bad. It's, does the county even have the authority to say no to data centers? And do you take on risk in doing that? Did that weigh sort of into your deliberative process on this?
definitely. I've talked to another state's attorney from another county, from McLean County. Um, he looked into it thoroughly for me because our state's attorney was pretty busy with some other stuff. And I've had another attorney reach out. So they've been looking into it. We can't just say no. You've got to have a good reason. And then how do I answer to the probably, I'm going to guess 60 to 70% of the community that is for the project for what it could do to our little community? Our county's 1,800 people, our city's 570. All we got is a power plant and coal mine and now a bunch of wind towers. Oh, and I want to add that this wind, a lot of this group that's against a data center doesn't want another wind tower in Oliver County. Well, I've done a lot of research on that going to meetings. Some of our money from the wind tax that the state collects, we've got to give it back to New Salem, Glen Ullin, Beulah, Hazen, and Washburn school districts and their fire districts, emergency management districts. So we don't even keep 100% of that in the county. And it'd be awesome if we could. But that's another whole different story why that happened. But, that's my whole plan. Keep the money here. Let's keep this county going. And this is something that could, I don't know. That's for the future guys to take care of now.
One thing that's really been interesting is I guess let me put it this way. I'm somebody who uses the open records laws a lot. And I very much value one of the great things when I talk to like reporters who work in other states, the level of access we have to our elected officials is really pretty remarkable in North Dakota. We are very, very open. Our open records laws are very, very strong. And I get a stomach ache when I see stuff like this, people filing what I would maybe characterize as being open records requests that aren't maybe in good faith, that are maybe intended more to harass or to create problems. I feel like that those laws get abused, and it is a constant fight to keep those laws in place, and to stop public access to this information being narrowed. There are good reasons to request that information, but when it's done frivolously, so it really gives me heartburn to see that abused. And again, getting back to, as Zach said, one part of this is, do we want data centers? Do we not want data centers? But the other part is, and this is something you said, you noted, quote, when good people are driven out, the entire community loses. So when somebody like you leaves, and again, this has happened in other, I feel like this is happening a lot. I mean, your story kind of caught attention and made some headlines, but I feel like there's other people who are just sort of quietly walking away. Who fills that vacuum when people like that walk away?
Well, I say the good answer to that would be the wife and I were trying to figure out. We probably had 175 people reach out, even from around the state. I've had calls from Dickinson down by Fort Abercrombie. Um, they're wanting to know why. Well, you can only take so much. And, I've lost quite a few good friends already that I assume were good friends. But they've taken these rumors that have been posted on these Facebook pages, and now they're accusing me of taking a bribe. I'm the last guy who would ever take a bribe. And, you know, why would I? They haven't even come to the commission yet to ask for a permit to do anything. So all I want to do is listen, learn. And now I believe I've lined it up with Fly Digital. I believe there's probably 30 to 40 people from Oliver County have went down to Allendale to visit the site. Some just went yesterday, 8 o'clock this morning. We had a conversation about it. That's what it's all about. And I've challenged people at that February commissioners meeting. Go down there, check it out. Well, some did. Some of them that are against this haven't called back. Now, if you want to be open minded, come and tell me your opinion now. Is it as bad as you said? Or were you surprised? I don't know. I'm not going to reach out to them because they're already against me with the accusations. And the slander. Yeah. And I don't mind the open records because they're going to find nothing. And now they're going to waste a bunch of money looking at nothing because a lot of it's been phone calls. And I don't have to release phone calls. So I don't know. Where do you go?
I think each of us have tipped our hands a bit, and to show that we kind of find this tactic, this aggression, this being the loudest in the room to be distasteful. Others might say, hey, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And I've wrestled with that in my own public service. Dave, how do you respond to somebody that might say that to you?
Okay, repeat that again.
Yeah, if folks on the other side of this debate who maybe are engaging in these tactics might tell their politicians, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. This is what you signed up for. Deal with it. How does that hit you? How do you respond to somebody who might say that?
Good point. I think that's their goal. They're already. Brad Dahl was appointed in my spot, and he was on the ballot to be on the county commission in November to replace a commissioner that's stepping off after 20 years. And so Brad was making calls. We talked a lot about this. Well, now he's in my spot. Now he's getting attacked. He built a $1 million restaurant and center. And why? Because he had the money. His wife had a dream, and they want to get more involved in the community. He was born and raised here. He was gone when he was into service. He's back. Now they're going after him. I've been in contact with the Mercer County commissioners. The same people are going to Mercer County doing the same thing to them now. So I don't know how you respond. I think that's their goal, is to push you out and then bring their own people in. And we've seen that. You guys have seen it. They want to put their own people in and then push the agenda their way, but it's one agenda. My goal and a lot of the commissioners I met from Morton County, McLean County, and Mercer, we've all got the same agenda. We want to see industry come in, our communities get better. But these people have, like I say, the same agenda, one agenda. And a lot of this group is against the wind farms also. And we've got 225 towers, probably more than any county in North Dakota. Is it good? I wouldn't want them, but those landowners that do, I say go for it. But I'm also representing the non-participating landowners who live in that vicinity that don't want them. They've got to have some protection. So I've been speaking up for them. So I work with both wind tower companies, Adele and Dextera. I'm on the phone with them constantly talking about it.
One of the difficult things is I mean, to your point, like, or I guess to Zach's point, what Zach brought up is the idea that they're saying, listen, we're just making our voices heard. We have strong opinions about this. We're saying it. And I think the problem is we have created all sorts of processes and sort of guidelines to allow public input and debate. but then also to allow decisions to get made. And it just seems here there's an effort to shut down the debate. There's an effort to say, because someone like Dave Berger isn't immediately against, and I think that's one of the funniest part about this is at no point have you said that you're in favor of building the data center. I don't know how you would have voted when it got down to that ultimate vote. I guess yay or nay on moving forward on a data center, if it ever came to that. I don't know how you would vote at this point. I think you sound inclined to listen, but it's like even that, like it's not like you've been out there like cheerleading. Yeah, we got to build data centers. You've just been saying, hey, let's go visit one they've already built. Hey, let's take their phone calls and listen to what they have to say and listen to what the benefits might be for our community. If we can't even allow that, how is that democracy? I guess is my question. I don't understand how we could say, well, this is a democratic process when someone has just immediately said, well, they're taking bribes or they're illegitimate. They're not a legitimate part of this debate because they're not immediately in line with my position.
Right. That's the thing. They, like I said, they don't want to hear the other side. But on the other hand, I get paid 18 or was getting paid 18,000 a year to be a commissioner. I've spent that by April 1st just on phone calls. So when these people would call with questions, I don't sit back. Most mornings I didn't get outside till 11. I'm pulling out a bunch of errors right now. And so I'd be on the phone trying to answer these questions or get answers to them. And some I'd get back to right away. Some would be at the end of the day. Well, then the next day, same thing, another question. So I've always tried to answer. Like I say, State Attorney McLean County, he's been such an asset to me. He helps me, how do you say, get back on track, ask the right questions of applied of these wind farms. How do you do it alone? You can't. You got to have other people that support you. And that's been my biggest benefit. Ones that do that. Now, the ones that don't want to hear the other side of the story, I think the only defense they have is attack, make up false accusations, turn a whole bunch against me. I'm going to say right now, 40, 50 at the most people, and that includes Mercer County and Oliver County people, are against these two projects in Mercer County and here. So they think they're the whole county. They're not. The other side is speaking out. And I think my resignation, that woke up a lot of people. They're coming out of the woodwork, calling. Like I say, we've had over 175 people call, text. We've had people call and say, can we come out to the farm just to talk to you, see how you're doing. And then the Facebook pages, the people that have supported me on that. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think you touched on something that I struggle with too in my decision making, Dave. And I think our hope is that these aggressive, inappropriate tactics are being used to make up for the lack of substantial support for their position, and that really there's a silent majority of reasonable people on the other side. How do we figure out if that's true or not? And how do we figure out, or how do we, I guess, reconcile this possibility and maybe that loud crowd of people is actually right on the merits? It reminds me, Rob, you quoted that comedian Mark Maron who said liberals annoyed America into fascism. A lot of times these tactics can annoy policymakers off the right decision that these people are supporting on the merits because they just have been so untoward in the way to get there. Dave, how do you figure out how to get to the right answer in this context?
Phone calls. Two of my legislators, District 33, have been astronomical, just over and above is for support. If I couldn't get an answer, either Keith or Anna would really reach out. And like I say, I can't do it alone, but they have been my support. Go back to your question. That's my biggest thing is reaching out, getting the answers that these people want. So go back to your question. The ones that have been making the negative comments, or some weren't even negative, they were questioning, like, why is he thinking like he is? So I've been on Facebook. I've been calling and Facebook, answering some of them. Now, I've had one lady who had posted on the page quite a bit against it. Now she wants to meet me. She must have looked up my Facebook post, realized what I've done in the community and in the state. I'm a director, state director with North Dakota Farmers Union. I'm not just involved in the community. I'm also on a committee to build a new senior center in Mandan. I don't even live in Martin County. I was asked to be on the committee. So I'm all over, but I love it. Politics was kind of in my blood, but not big politics. I want to be an honest person. So that was my deal. Reach out to these people. Now this gal has been texting quite our messaging on that post. She'd like to meet me in person. She wants to know what kind of person I am. And for me to realize she's not a bad person like I assume. So a lot of it's assumption.
Dave, let me ask you one last question. To the person listening to this, because one thing that I think we really try to advocate on the show is for people to get involved, people to consider public service. And unfortunately, I think stories like this are scary to them. Somebody saying, I don't want to be in the crosshairs. So what would your advice be to someone who is afraid of the crosshairs?
Well, let me jump back a minute. Another person, Paul, on the Facing North Dakota Coal Facebook page, he commented on there, well, I can't be much of a leader if he's for data centers. So I commented back to him. How do you know my opinion? Nobody knows my opinion. So how can you say you're judging me without any context? You're just making an assumption. And ever since I responded to him, he hasn't made a comment. So now I kind of got off base. I wanted to share that. If you could repeat your question, I apologize.
Yeah, what would your advice be to people who are want to serve on a city commission or a city or county commission or a park board or something, but they're afraid of the crosshairs? They look at a story like yours and say, I don't want that to happen to me.
Rob, that in the last 3 weeks, I've been asked that probably a dozen times from in-county, city, our park board, school board. Our city council going through the same problem. They took a lot of heat. Only one city council member is elected. The rest are all appointed because they just didn't want to take what it takes. But the couple that were appointed have been reaching out. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So I appreciate that because of the respect I've gained. You gotta stay in contact, not just locally, everywhere. And so to answer that, I think you just keep going forward. You got to get your questions answered, get somebody else's questions answered. And how do you do it? It takes a lot of time. What's going to keep you involved? Well, I couldn't take it. And more my wife, what do you say? She was getting tired of the constant phone calls. We were at the state hockey tournament in Fargo, and I took 26 phone calls in 2 days from a lot of the people that were against this. I did not ignore them. I took the phone calls. Should I have? Probably not. That was my 2 grandsons. That was their time to shine. But my view is you answer questions. The minute you ignore the public, now they got a reason not to trust. Now they don't trust me, even though I answered their questions. So for future people, there are so many avenues. And the ones that are contacting me, I'm saying, call these legislators. Call certain people to Capitol. Call the state's attorney from McLean County. There are so many. I had a little meeting with Morton County Commissioner yesterday. Talked a little bit about it. That's what you got to do. You got to make your connections, gain trust and respect of the community. And I think I've done that. And the response, back has been pretty much said it. But the non-believers, they don't believe there's, probably 60 to 70% of the people in the community want to at least hear more, see what it can do for the community. They're calling me out on the Facebook pages. I don't believe it. Dave Berger's making it up.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know a lot of these people, and they're judging me.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time and coming on today.
Dear Mrs. Landis, you have a gift for recognizing students as individuals and cultivating the abilities we don't yet see in ourselves. Alongside the success I found in the classroom, I learned the importance of trusting my own voice. I've carried a sense of confidence and a commitment to intellectual growth into every opportunity I've pursued since. Sincerely, Alexis.
Thanks, Alexis.
Of course, thank you. Public schools teach important lessons, and they also get us ready and give us confidence.
North Dakota Public Schools are an investment in our future.
This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
You know, Zach, as I kept saying, there's 2 stories there. One is the story of the debate we're having over data centers, which is important. You know, again, I want data centers to be built just because generally I'm in favor of us doing stuff in North Dakota. I'm definitely in favor of us doing things that are, as much as I support our ag and energy industries, I want North Dakota needs to diversify. We need to do things that are different. Data centers are different. I'm for doing them. That being said, I want an exacting regulatory process around them to make sure they're built responsibly, make sure that they're good neighbors, and also make sure that we don't end up paying for it on our electrical bills. Those are the 3 assurances I want. Otherwise, I want to build them. But it's not really about that. This is also about a larger question of people. I'm sure you know people who have quit the legislature because they just couldn't deal with the constant barrage of negativity sometimes. I mean, this is a really, really difficult part of public service right now.
Dave Berger's not on an island by himself here. He's just willing to speak about it publicly. You know, it is especially impacting our Republican friends across North Dakota. That's where sort of this debate is really festering between the more populist faction. You know, I think you've struggled with what the label is too.
That's the term that I used. I don't know that it's particularly accurate, but I don't.
Yeah, I think we know what we're talking about, and I think a lot of folks are dealing with that. You know, we like to say social media is not real life, but sometimes it is, and it makes you nervous about your personal safety, about your public reputation, about roping your family in. You know, in the extreme, we saw the Hortman assassination in Minnesota last year, and you know, those things do weigh on lawmakers, on people thinking about running for office. You know, I'm just struck, especially at that local level, the further away you get from the White House and Congress and governor down to these local levels, it is a mundane job. This is paving streets and making sure the garbage is picked up on time. These don't need to be contentious positions. And unfortunately, these commissioners are flung into positions where they're trying to do their best. The state's attorney, I think you quoted him in your column on this. These are just people trying to do their best. And I think people so quickly jump to insinuations of corruption, of bribery, of nefarious reasons. A lot of times we, as lawmakers, as policymakers, just get things wrong. That happens. That's part of the system. And we can change it once we do. It's not always some grand conspiracy as to why things happen in opposition to the vocal crowds out there.
Well, that's one thing that is really hard is the conclusion that gets jumped to, which is that there's no possible way for you to disagree with me in good faith. Like, there's no possible way. You have to have been bought off. You have to be corrupt. You have to be racist or whatever ill motivation they want to impute to you. It can't just be that I think you're wrong on the merits. And if we've lost that, I don't know how we have a democracy. And I don't think we have lost it. I shouldn't say that. Because I think there are so many public meetings that are happening across this state that are, as you put it, mundane. And they're debating bike paths. You know, they're talking about how we're going to pay for new streetlights. And it's just normal routine debate. You know, we tend to focus on the ugly parts of it, but I do think that this is starting to happen where you're seeing all of a sudden you're a county commissioner in Oliver County and you're getting you're put on blast like you're a member of Congress. Only unlike members of Congress, you don't have staff, you don't have
Right.
security, you don't have the resources to sort of handle it. And it's I wish people would think a little bit more. I'm not asking anybody to change their mind and support data centers or stop advocating for your point of view. But would you think about how you're doing it a little bit? Because I think that really matters.
Yeah, and I think, those of us that are in partisan politics, those of us that comment on politics, we probably none of us have clean hands on this, but we've created this word corruption to be just a cudgel. You say the word and it's used for partisan gains. There's a left to center institution called the Searchlight Institute. They did a big survey on corruption, and what wasn't surprising to me is voters generally think all politicians are corrupt all the time. But what was surprising is they have a much broader definition of corruption, to the point of it could just include voting against my preferred outcome because I think you sided with the elites instead. And I think maybe all of us should take a step back and say that it's rare that people are making the wrong decision for nefarious reasons. It's more often than not they listened to the wrong stakeholders. They had bad data. They exercised a judgment call in the wrong way. And that's what our political process should be able to remedy the next time the elections come around.
I have been trying to be more conscientious about that in my work, is at times taking a step back and saying, I want to remind you, not everybody in politics is like this. Because I mean, my job is to come to the bad situations like a moth to a flame. Because that's my job, is to uncover them, expose them, analyze them, hopefully illuminate people's opinions about them. Um, but I feel like part of my job also needs to be stepping back and saying, listen, most of these people who are serving in the legislature or serving in local government, they're just people like you and me. They're fathers and mothers and brothers and husbands. They're all those things. And they're just doing the best they can. And sometimes they're wrong, or sometimes they're not wrong. They just disagree with you, and that doesn't make them corrupt or evil or anything else. We have this cynicism, and I think there's people who exploit that cynicism too for gain. It's very easy to start painting. If you're an organizer and you want to the rabble rouse, to start using that language. Oh, we're against the elites, we're against the corrupt, and start insinuating certain things. The public is fertile ground for that right now. And it's unfortunate because then you start branding a lot of people who don't deserve to be branded that way.
Right. And I don't want to dismiss the cynicism as completely undeserved, too. I think a lot of
That's
folks
fair. Yeah.
look around and they say, school meals is a good example. People have been asking really nicely, asking persistently, and they keep getting the answer is no. I get why some people, I think about how I argue with my kids and my wife sometimes. When they don't listen to me talking nicely, what do I start doing? I start yelling. And I think that happens in politics too. And I gave this sort of gentle warning to our friends at the Chamber of Commerce in Fargo Moore and West Fargo that the business community is probably used to getting its preferred outcomes in a state like North Dakota. But if they're not reading the room right now to see that there's this through line from mineral rights to carbon pipelines to wind to data centers to property tax exemptions, that train might be pulling into the station in terms of these incentives, and they're going to have to do a better job articulating the value proposition that comes back to these communities and not just to the shareholders of whatever business entities involved.
Well, I think I think you're so spot on with that, because I think a lot of things have been taken for granted, because North Dakota's been a very easy place to do business in for a long time. But now all of a sudden, you're in a place where it used to be very easy to build pipelines is now hard. A place where it's very easy to build energy projects like transmission lines is now hard, because people are pushing back. And you can't just dismiss them, because a lot of them are landowners. They have rights. So you're going to have to figure out a way to work with them. And that's hard. That's hard. It's hard to work with people who don't like you or are angry at you for some reason. That's difficult, but that's what democracy calls us to do.
Sure does.
There's no other way around it. What else do we want to talk about? Should we talk about, speaking of some of this, Trygve Hammer? I like Trygve Hammer. I think he's doing something that's really smart, actually. Now, I've been writing perhaps ad nauseum about the populist faction and the divide in the North Dakota Republican Party. You have sort of the traditional Republicans, of which Trygve's opponent, Julie Fedorchak, is one. She was one of all of the statewide Republican incumbents who skipped the NDGOP state convention. The NDGOP, of course, is under control of this sort of populist group of Republicans. So I think, and I based it on two things. One was Trigby Hammer randomly showing up at the NDGOP convention. I don't think that was an accident. I think he went out there. I think how he ended up in the convention center was maybe an accident. But I think Trigby was thinking, maybe
Fortune
I'll go to the
favors the
gun.
bold on that one.
Maybe I'll go out to the gun show today. That was happening in the same facility as the NDGOP, and maybe I'll get to kibitz with some of these people who are feeling a little disillusioned with Julie Fedorchak. Smart move on his part. Then he posted a comment on my Facebook which I don't think was an accurate analysis, but I think it was aimed towards where he's saying, well, these populists, they're not all book banners. They're not all, for, injecting religion in politics, kind of defending them a little bit. I think Trigby's trying to triangulate a little bit. I think he sees a group of Republicans who are maybe not happy with the traditional Republicans who have been finding a lot of success at the ballot box. And he's thinking, if I could give them a landing spot, even if they're voting against Julie Fedorchak instead of for me, that's going to help me. I think that's what he's up to.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an intentional political strategy from Trigby and Team Hammer, but if it is, I think it's a worthwhile one in pursuing. As a North Dakota Democrat, I do think chasing this factional divide in Republicans is a bit of a white whale for us. That those folks that think so-called normal Republicans aren't conservative enough.
I thought about that too, but the problem is, like, if you're Trigby Hammer, you've been on the statewide ballot a couple times now. Your vote total's not moving much. So
right. And if you're just being a political operative, it's a total victory to get some folks like that to vote for you instead of the Republican opponent. It's a half victory to get them to just stay home and convince them that they're not being listened to, and this is a way to protest the representatives they have. But I think there's also Trigby, and I know Trigby, he's an earnest fella too, and I think there is something wholesome about being willing to follow that lost art of persuasion. Just because these folks are really against me on reproductive rights or the role of religion in politics doesn't mean we don't have common cause on land use and the role of government in that. And maybe we'd all be better off. We wouldn't get to instances like Dave Berger experienced if we all pursue that path a little more diligently. So good on Trigby for taking the first step.
Well, and also, I mean, it's not just in those two data points that I mentioned about Trigby Hammer. We've seen sort of a horseshoe form between, and I don't want to speak pejoratively, but sort of far right, far left on carbon pipelines. I mean, when you have the Dakota Resource Council working with somebody like Senator Jeff Magrum, I mean, those are not two people you would expect to normally make common cause. They're making common cause on carbon pipelines. And so that may be a situation where, Hammer sees an opportunity. I think it's very fascinating, and it wouldn't surprise me and when I say it's calculated, I'm not being critical here. I think it's smart politics. If that's what he's doing on purpose, and maybe he'll do more of it.
Yeah,
But
I think it is.
now,
And I think credit to
he's still got a mountain to climb against Fedorchak, but it's interesting.
he does too. And I think credit to North Dakota Democrats there for giving him the latitude to explore those conversations, right? This isn't a state where a Trigby Hammer has to play to his base and take the most extreme left positions just to make sure he survives the primary. He gets to go out and run that general election campaign starting right now, and hopefully he's hitting the trail hard.
We are just a couple of cycles removed from Mark Haugen getting pushed out of the U.S. House race, though. So I'm not sure I entirely believe. It's not like Trigby's been overt about this, and I think if he got overt about catering this group of voters, I think he would have some problems on his left flank. Because I don't know, after watching what happened to Mark Haugen, I don't know how much latitude those Democratic maybe it's changed.
Yeah,
I was at your guys' state convention.
Hopefully that was lesson learned. That was the find out following the FA on that one. We don't need to put, you said it, I think, just this week, that politics is about addition, not subtraction. And Trigby might as well pursue that path and see where it leads.
Right. I think it would be foolish for Democrats to not give him, or to be critical of Trigby for trying to do that, because again, he's trying to add to his base. What does Trigby Hammer care why they vote for him? I mean, I think he's going to want, please vote for me because you believe in me and you believe what I'm campaigning on. But also, if you just vote for me, or at least don't vote for her, That's a W for
Yeah,
him.
and I think Trigvi has earned the credibility to say, look, my values aren't something I'm going to compromise. I'll talk to people that disagree with me on serious policy issues and have very different values, but trust me, I'm going to hold firm to, what I believe in and what motivates me. But why not hear folks out in North Dakota, especially when they have a significant, sizable minority of the state?
Yeah. Well, it's that's an interesting move. The other thing I wrote about, it's now this is really kind of a national story, but I wrote about it from a North Dakota perspective, which was the shadow docket at the US Supreme Court. And I got a little frustrated with because the New York Times broke the story. They got their hands on some of the internal memos from the court, and the way they characterized it was and just to set all this up, we're talking about the court taking action towards the end of President Barack Obama's administration. He had been trying to implement his clean power plan through Congress, hadn't found any luck, then made it very clear. In fact, he said in a State of the Union at one point, I'll do it with Congress or without. I'm paraphrasing, but words to those effect. And so his administration basically started trying to implement law without Congress. The Supreme Court acted. Now, normally the Supreme Court's very deliberatively, but the Supreme Court took what was for them, and at that time, an extraordinary step in staying when a bunch of the states sued, when the Obama administration implemented the Clean Power Plan, a bunch of states sued. The Supreme Court, I guess there's routine appeals made to the Supreme Court to stay. Normally, the Supreme Court says no. In that instance, at the behest of Chief Justice John Roberts, and I guess what you'd call the conservatives on the court, they granted that stay, they blocked it, and then, basically the case never played out. It became a moot point because we ended up electing President Trump in 2016. The New York Times is casting this as what an extraordinary thing, what a terrible thing, and they're now doing this a lot more often. I'm looking at it as we've had this trend in presidents, Republican and Democrat, using their executive powers in truly extraordinary ways has been developing. I look at it as the court adapting. And from a North Dakota perspective, I like it. Because I don't think that North Dakota doesn't swing a very powerful stick when it comes to presidential politics. There's a reason why not very many presidential candidates visit our state. They don't visit very often. We have a lot more clout in Congress, particularly in the Senate, where we have the same number of senators as every other state. And so if we have the Supreme Court acting to sort of more quickly respond to executive actions, I think that's a good thing, as long as we're putting the onus back on Congress, saying that's where the laws need to be made.
Well, yeah, where I think we'll find agreement, Rob, is the worst actor here is Congress. This is not a partisan issue. For generations, Congress has abdicated its lawmaking responsibilities, either by
I just want to say one thing. Congress, the fact that Congress is not passing the president's agenda is not license for the president to just try to implement that agenda on their own.
True enough. But one of the ways that Congress also fails is passing legislation that punts the real thorny issues to administrative rulemaking. Sure. And that's where a lot of these difficult legal decisions lie, is what did Congress mean when they said this vague thing about implementing this law? I would disagree with your validation of the Supreme Court shadow docket emerging trend. And I think people that oppose executive order should oppose the shadow docket for the same reason. It's all based on motivated reasoning. As long as the outcome is right, the process doesn't matter. And I think that's particularly dangerous when the Supreme Court adopts that. We have quick political solutions if Congress or the president is doing an end around processes. We don't with the court. They're not responsive to the body politic in the way those branches are.
So let me push back on that a little bit. So in the New York Times story, one of the examples was the courts ultimately struck down, I think it was a mercury regulation. Court struck it down. The EPA went too far. President Obama's EPA commissioner at the time came out and basically said, it doesn't matter what the courts did. We got done what we wanted to do anyway. Basically saying the courts can't keep up with us, so we can do whatever we want. That seemed to be the message to the courts. Isn't there then some impetus for the courts to act more quickly if that's going to be the attitude of the executive branch?
No, I don't think so. I don't think, Chief Justice Roberts likes to talk about calling balls and strikes. That's about applying the law, not being annoyed by an after action statement by a particular administrative
Yeah,
official.
but I don't agree with that premise that he acted out of annoyance. Let's keep in mind that original shadow docket, that was a stay. They didn't issue an opinion. They issued a stay and blocked the law from taking effect.
Right, but
Now,
here's the
further
problem that creates.
litigation would have taken place, but then we had an election and the point was
Sure.
rendered moot.
There's the political angle, but let's put on our law nerd hats for a little bit. And if anybody's really interested in this, I'd recommend the work of a professor named Steve Laddick. He happened to teach my federal courts class when I was in law school. Brilliant guy. But the problem for future courts, future presidents, future Congresses is the Supreme Court issued a one paragraph opinion. We have no earthly idea why it said this had to be state. We didn't have the benefit of a factual record being developed. We didn't have the benefit of a lower court analysis of the facts and the law. Some have even suggested the Supreme Court itself is acting sort of on the wrong side of Article 3 of the Constitution. That sets up the Supreme Court as having, quote, appellate jurisdiction. Here it went first. It wasn't considering an appeal at all. And I think we have to remember the words of Justice Robert Jackson, not the current Justice Jackson. He quipped that the Supreme Court is not final because it's infallible. It's infallible because it's final. And when the Supreme Court jumps to the front of the line, I think it really calls into question the fulsome analysis they're doing. It makes it hard for future parties to litigate these cases. This is a situation where 2 wrongs don't make a right for the president to go around Congress, and 3 wrongs don't make a right for the Supreme Court to deviate from its procedures either.
Yeah, I'm struggling because what you're saying is all nice if we're all sitting in a civics classroom together and talking about this in a philosophical way. Out in the real world, we have, again, presidents. And I mean, if you were upset about President Barack Obama's executive orders, you had better be incensed about President Trump's executive orders. And I think I could even be critical of the court at times allowing the president to do some things I think are probably pretty explicitly unconstitutional. And I think a good analogy on this would be President Trump taking us to war with Iran. Right now, Congress, and we could blame Congress again. They have this War Powers Act that gives the president a limited time window of war making ability that is invoked by perceived national threats. And the problem is we're defining national threat down to the point where we basically don't even need one. The president could just take us to war, and now we're in a war. And at some point in the future, I guess Congress can either decide to fund it or not fund it, or approve it or not approve it. And it's like, it doesn't matter because we're already in this war and now we don't have a way to come back. And I worry that we're putting the courts in the same position. If we're saying that this is an untoward thing for them to do, then we're essentially saying, well, we have to allow the executive branch to just do whatever they want to do. And then while this litigation plays out, that can take years, to the point where, again, you have an Obama administration official saying right out loud, well, it doesn't matter what the courts do. We got done what we wanted to do anyway. How can the courts be a check on executive branch power when that's possible?
Well, I think this particular set of facts is actually a bad example of, well, court cases just drag on. The D.C. Circuit had already scheduled an expedited review process. The hearing was on the books. The New York Times article even points out that this plan wasn't going to be implemented for a full 6 years after it was issued. There was a national election that was about to happen. So the immediacy of the harms to the energy sector weren't really there. And, if they were, that's something a factual record in the courts below could have developed. So I think courts have a much better ability to act quickly, but in a normal course than we give them credit for. That was playing out in this particular case. Even if that weren't true, I would like to believe that the Supreme Court, the federal courts, would be the adult in the room, and it's not just one actor's bad, therefore another actor's bad, then we'll be the bad ones too. Somebody has to be sort of that bulwark against this erosion of norms and say, we are going to do business like we always have, and we're going to issue remedies like we always have. It's up to these political branches to figure out how to make this tenable.
Yeah, I really struggle, and it surprises me that this, like the progressives are so against this. And maybe it shouldn't because the majority on the court right now is conservative. So I think that's coloring. I think that if this was a majority being led by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, people might, and she was slapping down Trump executive orders.
But that will
Progressives
flip
might
too, just
feel
like,
differently.
you know, there were Obama executive orders and Trump executive orders. There's at some point in the future, there's going to be a liberal Supreme Court majority that's issuing stays that stop a Republican president. And we're back in the same cycle of the ends justify the means.
Well, I just struggle because this has been a generational drift towards these use of executive powers. And I don't know what can stop them. I mean, this idea, if we'll just keep doing things the way we've always done them. Well, the way we've always done them has allowed this flourishing of executive branch power to the point where Congress seems irrelevant at this point. The laws are getting written in the executive branch because Congress can't govern. They can't even budget, Zach. And, I mean, that's a problem. But I mean, if the judicial branch can't do anything about that, all they can control is how they handle the cases before them. And maybe it's not a bad thing to do a hurry up here. I mean, yeah, it deviates from the history of the court.
Well,
but
one of the opportunity costs of that, though, is we don't know what the outer bounds of a president's authority is under that particular environmental law that the Obama administration tried to adapt its clean power plan through. That's something that a fulsome Supreme Court opinion could have told us. So then a president, no matter party, would have known this is inbounds, this is out of bounds.
Again, all they issued was a stay. The court would have made it, the case would have made it to them eventually, but for the fact that it was rendered a moot point by an election.
Right. And it's unfortunate. I mean, now we're left kind of drifting in the wind to know what's fair and what's foul.
Yeah. I really wish Congress would get their act together. I don't care who's in charge, Republicans, Democrats. It's been a disgrace.
Right. And well, I know you love to blame voters too, but hopefully the electorate also punishes Congress for inaction as much as it does for actions it disagrees with.
I have a feeling they won't.
I have a feeling right.
I have a feeling they're going to keep voting along the same partisan lines, most of them, that they typically do, right? And we have those people in the middle who kind of sway back and forth, which is why majorities in Congress end up being cyclical. But it is so frustrating. And then we mostly reelect the same people. And whose fault is that? Boy, you got me on my favorite rant about blaming the voters. But you know what? We're being governed in the way that we deserve because we're electing these people.
And just so the record's clear, I don't blame the voters. They are infallible and the most important part of democracy.
You're not on the ballot, Zach, this year. You can blame the voters a little bit. You can blame the voters a little bit if you want to. I'll blame the voters. I never have to be on the ballot. It's your guys' fault. It's my fault too. It's the way we're voting. We're doing this to ourselves.
Rob, in this era of term limits and county commissioners being forced to resign midstream, you're going to be next man up at some point.
You think so? No way. Not me. Not me. I'm here forever. All right. We're going to end the show there. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, if you want to join the show, you could send us a text. You can give us a phone call, leave a voicemail, 701-587-3141. Go to plaintalknd.com. That's our YouTube channel. Great way to engage with all the content of the show. Plus, it's full video. That's a lot of fun. But we're available on all the different, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find Plain Talk. Just search for us. We're on all the social media platforms. Plain Talk ND is our handle on X, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Find us out there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again.
That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
And just so the record's clear, I don't blame the voters. They are infallible and the most important part of democracy.
You're not on the ballot, Zach, this year. You can blame the voters a little bit.
Hi, I'm Megan Invick with Americans for Prosperity, North Dakota. Rising property taxes are putting pressure on homeowners across our state. While recent relief is a good start, families need permanent solutions, not temporary fixes. That's why AFP North Dakota is pushing for meaningful, permanent property tax reform, so homeowners can plan for the future without worrying about being taxed out of their own backyards. Learn more about the road to opportunity and our plan for property tax relief at afpnd.org.
The North Dakota oil and natural gas industry works here, and works here, and here, and even works here by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, flood protection projects, and our schools. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities.
Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org.
This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.